Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 255 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is being intentional. Our quote of the day comes to us from John C. Maxwell. Be intentional to add value to every person you meet every day. It is a complete honor to bring you today's episode. Our guest happens to be one of my personal accountability partners, and as he continues to add value to both my personal and professional life, I know he will add value to yours as well. Jeff Forrester is paying it forward every single day in numerous ways. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Jeff, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thank you. It's really cool to be on here finally.
I appreciate it. So the first question I'm going to ask you today is, are you ready to inspire at least one person today?
100%. Let's do this.
So the number one objective, as you know, is to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up. And I was curious if you yourself either have a no-quit story or perhaps a really challenging time that tested you where you could have given up and given in, but you didn't.
You know, Chris, it's a great question, and I've heard you ask it a ton of times. And for me, what I would ask that your listeners, as they listen to this, just keep an open mind in the sense of, I feel like for me, every single day is that no quit moment, right? So if I rewind my life back to my childhood, I grew up a fat kid, and I grew up somebody who gave up anytime it got difficult. If something was challenging, didn't come easy, I quit. So that was pretty much most of my life. Now, I was able to accomplish some things as I got into adulthood, but that quitter mindset it followed me through a lot. So anytime something became somewhat challenging, I would work hard, but then I would quit. I would try, and then I would stop. And what I started finding myself doing is I was just creating a ton of excuses on why I couldn't accomplish something. And I recently, actually it's probably been about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I read the book Mindset by Carol Dweck, I think is her name. And it talked about fixed mindset versus growth mindset. And then about the same time frame, I read Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. And he talks a lot about the same thing in a much more colorful manner than the great doctor does. But it's all about the same thing, is when I think about myself particularly, and I feel like this would resonate with a lot of people, is when things become challenging, it's so easy to create an excuse to quit. And once I admitted that to myself, that I need to stop making excuses and look for things that are more difficult in life, I would get so much more out of life. And, you know, you and I have talked on occasions in the sense of the more things that we challenge ourselves with and accomplish, meaning doesn't matter if we hit our goal, but as long as we are striving to do that, that we feel so much better and so much more fulfilled than if we just never tried at all. And, you know, there's countless examples that I have about running a marathon and not hitting the time that I want, or trying to accomplish something in the business world and not making it. But it's that process of thinking of, am I going to create an excuse, or am I going to look for something difficult? Because that's where the reward is in that challenge that gets you to that point. And so if you can strive to look for the challenges, strive to look for those things that are going to drive you every day, that's going to create a much better story for yourself. And that's why I say it's every day, because for me, every day it's that challenge to overcome excuses of why I shouldn't do something, why I can't do something. And it also embodies what your message is no quit living, right? I mean, it's not a one event and say, okay, I didn't quit in this event. It's every day.
You touched on a lot of really good stuff in that segment. I appreciate your backstory, and it is about the whole entire process of not quitting for a lifetime, for not just a season, but for like for the entirety of somebody's life. And I've shared this quote a lot, but it's one of my all-time favorites by Zig Ziglar: "Is failure is an event, not a person." And I think we don't look at that concept enough. I think we say it, I think we verbalize it to others, to ourselves, but there's a difference of going ahead and really understanding it. You touched on two great books, Mindset by Carol Dweck, as well as Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. Two very different styles of writing, but two very, very powerful in their message. So got to flip now just to the question that I ask everybody, just knowing that you touched on a couple books, is wanted to see if you're reading anything currently, or perhaps you've read something recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
Oh man, there's so many, and I know we've talked about a lot, so I'll give you a couple of different ones. Some that I would consider more secular than some that fall in line with my Christian beliefs. Is a couple is Obstacle is the Way and Stillness is the Key, and both of those are by Ryan Holiday, and they are spectacular books because Ryan Holiday, for a young guy, he really writes way beyond his years, and they're quick reads, but they're so relevant to give tools and tips that go back to like 400 BC. So these are things that have been tested through time. Another two that I've read recently is Walking with God by John Eldredge, and then the other one is Soul Keeping by John Ortberg. And both of those are again, really good things that give you tools that I think are essential to that no quit living mindset of figuring out ways to equip yourself, from the Obstacle of the Way and Ryan Holiday's books to these other books, Walking with God and Soul Keeping. They just give you all those things to just have that no quit living attitude.
Yeah, I think those are four great books, and Ryan Holiday is somebody that I know you've spoken about, and you've posted some things from some of his books on social media. And to your point about he brings up stories from a long time ago, I think one of the best things about books is they are true and they continue to go. I mean, I think from a statistic perspective, the greatest book of all time in regards to selling is the Bible, obviously. And you take it a step further, Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. That book was written in the 1930s and is still spoken about today in 2020 on podcasts, YouTube channels, live TV. So I think the reality is a great book that's written well. It'll continue to be passed on forward. And I'm sure in 10, 15, 20 years from now, books will be lesser in the sense of the actual hard book, whether it be audiobook, whether it's digital, whether it be a new form of it. But I'm glad you touched on those four. And I got to ask you now, and I'm curious to get your perspective on this, is if you had to define yourself, but you only could use one word, what would you pick?
So, I've listened to the last few that you've had, and it was funny. This came up on a conversation that we had with our big group just last week, and it depends on the day, right? So I've thought a lot about this, and that may be taking away from the question that you typically ask, but at least it's a benefit of me listening to your previous shows. I would say for today, that one word that defines me is forgiven. For forgiven, we've got two different opportunities, right? So forgiven for me is forgiven for things that I've done in the past. And as a Christian, I'm so thankful that I have that grace, that I am forgiven for things in my past. But the other thing that I would say why that word means so much to me is that I've learned to forgive myself for things. And you mentioned that quote before about failure is an event and not a person. And for me, I had a really difficult time forgiving myself for failures, whether that was something that may I had done something, to someone, or if I failed in completing a task that I wanted to, is I really had a hard time forgiving myself. And over time, that became a habit of not forgiving myself. Then it was beating myself up. And so that's why I picked that word, and I've thought a lot about it because it just has so many multiple meanings for me. And I hope that resonates with other people. that the power of forgiveness, not only asking forgiveness from someone else, but taking a moment and forgiving yourself for the shortcomings that you have will start you on that path of a no quit living mindset.
Forgiveness is one of those things that it's something that's easy to say, it's easy to read, it's easy to type, but the reality of it is it's not easy to do. And you touched on something which I think is one part of it, is you have to be not only willing to forgive yourself, but you have to be willing to really move forward and say, okay, I made a mistake here, or I missed this goal or objective. And the second part of it, which I think is actually just as hard, if not harder in some ways, is forgiving others. And I always tell people is, if you want to forgive yourself, you have to forgive others. And if you want to forgive others, you have to be willing to forgive yourself. And I think it's one of those things where it teeters on both sides of the fence. So I'm glad you touched on that, because it is a very powerful word. And I often quote on social media the power of fill in the blanks. And I think the power of forgiveness, whether it's personal, whether it's romantic relationships, business relationships, or it's just friends of yours in the past. I think this one thing that we're going through, this coronavirus, I think the reality for a lot of people, it's making us look at life a little bit differently. It's making us look at really what is important in our life and what are the quote-unquote most important things. So with that in mind, I wanted to just change lanes here for a second into your social media presence. And I have to just commend you, and I want to say that I think you do an amazing job being truly authentic. And what I mean by that is I've gotten a chance to know you now for the past many months, and I feel that a lot of people post things on social media because they know that they're going to get likes, or they know that they're going to get comments. And I don't want to in any way say that I'm a social media expert and I understand all the stuff behind it, but I really want to commend you because you take things that are not only sometimes faith-based, because you do have a faith-based background, but more importantly, you have things that are relevant to your day, to your family, to your business, and you do a lot of inspirational things. And I got to ask you, who are some people that you follow on social media that inspire you and motivate you that you maybe possibly like to recommend or introduce to our listeners?
Yeah, no, and that's a great question. And, several that I would say that besides yourself, of course, we have a mutual friend, Chris Wilberding, and he's C. Wilberding. And then there's Tim Douglas that has been putting a lot of stuff up. Tim Douglas Inspires. Christoph Lewis, who you were on his podcast, and he was on yours. And then Chad Wright is another one. So I could list a ton because there's so many people that are out there that I would say beyond the typical ones that have the millions of followers that really do put a lot of good stuff up there. But there's guys like us that have a really cool platform with social media that we can share the messages that we have, but also share the messages that resonate. And there's so many guys that maybe have 100 followers that just put some fire up there that are great. So there's just so many people. I could sit here for the next 10 minutes and probably list off names, but those are the ones that come to mind first.
So follow-up to that is, and I'm interested to get your opinion on this, but I find that a lot of people, quote unquote, miss the boat when it comes to social media. And what I mean by that is with the buttons mute, with the buttons of unfollowing someone's stories or not seeing their posts, I think what that means to me is in today's challenging days, again, going back to this coronavirus, I think for me personally, I want to mute that negativity. And we've been using the hashtag for a bit, mute negativity, and inspire people. And I think people don't really understand that you can control what you see on your social media. Unlike, turn on ESPN and there's a basketball game on ESPN. You can't just press a button and all of a sudden see something different. But I think people don't fully understand that. Just wanted to get your kind of 2 cents on the importance of what you see and what you put in front of your mind.
Oh, 100%. And you and I could go through quote after quote after quote of all the different big time thinkers that have talked about this. But it's just the same thing from a nutrition standpoint is if you feed your body junk, you're going to be unhealthy. If you feed your brain junk, you're going to be unhealthy. And I don't watch the news. I try to, if I'm looking for information, I just go directly to the WHO website or the CDC. If I'm looking for positivity, that's all that I put on my Instagram. I mean, that's all I try to follow. It's what I try to comment. And Instagram there's some really smart people that create algorithms on what you see, what you comment is going to come up more frequently. And so the more positive people I follow and the more positive comments I leave, I'm getting that same amount in return. It's unbelievable. The more you filter out the junk food and stop eating, the Oreo ice cream of Instagram of negativity, because it tends to be fun because it builds you up a little bit. But if you cut that out, you'll really lean out and you'll become more healthy from a mental perspective. And then you'll see the positivity bubble up and you get excited. I get excited when I see what other people say. And it goes back to what you and I talked about is I'm also I feel like I need to be intentional about putting stuff up. If I'm going to hit the like button, I better have read the post that the person put, because I'll go through and I'll start seeing, oh, it's a cool picture. I like the little tagline, and I hit like, and then I purposefully unlike it until I read it. And there's so many people that just hit that like button and scroll, but they never read what you said. And so to me, it's so important to clean your plate, so to speak, for every post that's up there, so that way you can gain value from what that person had to say.
I'm glad you touched on that, because you went a lot deeper than I did in regards to social media perspective of what you like, what you follow, and what you comment. And I think, to your point, the algorithms that are made and are built just for that is Instagram, Facebook, fill in the blank, whatever the next social media platforms that will come out and continue to come out. They want to be, i.e., user-friendly. They want their users to like and comment on it and buy things and all that stuff. So to your point, for our listeners out there, is if you want to see more of a specific topic or more of a specific genre, whether that's authors, whether that's speakers, whether it's positivity, you do have the ability, whether you know it or not, in regards to liking things, commenting on things. And you touched on something that was really interesting that I think so many people have done these quote unquote challenges on Instagram alone, is they type something and the top part of it is positive or flashy or catchy, and then the middle of it, it's like, if there's a negative spin to it or a challenging question, like if you've liked it, if you've read this, don't like it because it means you really didn't. And all of a sudden it just messes with people. And there've been all these cool memes out there about what people actually read versus just going, like you said, going through it, just clicking like. So I'm glad you touched on that. I'm curious to get your answer to this one. If I had the ability to grant you dinner with anybody, dead or alive, who would you pick?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say the first and foremost is I lost my father in 1991 to lung cancer. So he would be at the top of the list. There's so many cool historical people that I would want to meet. There's, like you just think about, we've talked a little bit about my faith, the Apostle Paul, about the challenges that he faced from who he was and who he became, and then all the things that he was challenged with. But my dad by far, just to catch him up on everything that's happened.
No, I think it's important to continue in that regard. And I think when you lose somebody early, obviously the reality is that dinner would not be, hey, how's it going? It's going to be more along the lines of, hey, here's what's been going on. I want to catch up on everything. But what's been going on in your life as well?
Right.
So follow up to that, and it's always kind of like a back-to-back, is if you could go back, and I know this because you're such a young man, it's only a couple weeks ago, but if you could go back to the 20-year-old version of yourself and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be? And I touched on it earlier, it's just don't quit so easy. Challenge yourself, do things that are difficult, and enjoy the challenge. And not everything is going to be easy. And if it's easy, it's not worth it. That's great advice, and I think I probably would have liked to have heard that, my 20-year-old version as well.
Yeah, because I ran from everything. I look back and I've forgiven myself for it, but it's ridiculous. But what it has done is, fortunately, that through that reflection is I'm now able to hopefully tell my 20-year-old self, but in the form of my 11-year-old son and my 9-year-old daughter. I'm able to coach them through the things that I wish I would have told myself if I could, and I can't, but I can tell them. And so I have a monumental task and a not a requirement, I lost the word, but anyways, but just a duty to them to teach them that as well.
So, accountability is one of our favorite words. We talk about it quite often. So, got to ask you, what does accountability, or how do you personally define accountability?
I think it's being intentional. I think it's one of those things where, you and I, we've had these different conversations around accountability, but we'll use some of these challenges that have been passed around, right? So we've talked about each other of we're supposed to do 100 push-ups a day. And so for me, that's a mental decision that I have to make every day when I get up. And I'm accountable to you and to Chris to do those things. And so for me, I have to be intentional. So if I'm not intentional, I can't be held accountable. Well, I can be held accountable, but I'm not accountable to you, which I should be. So I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. And I think the way you answer is being intentional is it's what you say you're being intentional about, what you agree to. And I think what people miss sometimes with accountability is accountability is not just to somebody else. That's a piece of it, and that's a portion of it. And you made a very specific reference to committing to a challenge of doing 100 push-ups per day. You're holding yourself accountable to myself and to Chris. But what people I think don't miss is before you can be accountable to somebody else and before you can be intentional to others with your actions and your words, is you have to be accountable and intentional to yourself first. And I think I talk about it a lot, is looking in that self-accountability mirror. You can't lie to that person. You maybe be able to fib a friend, or I maybe did 85 push-ups and might shoot you a text and say, hey, I did 101, and there's no real way you'll know. But if I go in and look at that self-accountability mirror, I can't tell myself like, oh, I did 101, because the person looking back at me is going to say, no, you didn't.
Yeah, exactly. And it's fun to issue small challenges and small victories. And this will be another book, but Atomic Habits by James Clear. He talks about being 1% better every day. And I know you've referenced that on several occasions. And it's fun to do little tasks that seem meaningless, but can be so powerful. So about 6 months ago, I wrote a Post-it note, put it on my accountability mirror, floss daily. I haven't flossed my teeth daily ever in my life, and I'm 47 years old. But 6 months ago, I now can say that I have flossed every day for 6 months in a row. And I went to the dentist without saying anything, and they're like, wow, your teeth look really good this time. I'm like, what? They didn't look good last time? But it just goes to show that I said, well, I've been flossing every day. And they're like, it shows. And so the dentists always say you floss the teeth you want to keep. And for me, that goes to everything from an accountability perspective, is you just do the things that you want to get done. And if you don't just make those small little improvements every day, like flossing your teeth, like doing 100 push-ups a day, you can't accomplish the big things. So,
no, and that's a great book. James Clear wrote Atomic Habits. I actually just gifted it to somebody that's in one of our masterminds, and I can't wait to get his perspective on it. But you mentioned something that I think is really important. It's getting 1% better every day. And James Clear in no way is the only person that's come up with that. There are so many people that talk about that, whether it's sports, whether it's parents to their kids in school. But it's something that I think if you really break down what it is, it's so doable, and it takes a bigger goal and reverse engineers it down to these bite-sized pieces. And I talk about this all the time. It's like losing weight. Nobody's ever gained or lost 40 pounds because they missed one workout or they had a really bad cheat meal. It's one bad meal and another one. And it's, the flip side is they lose that weight by having one great workout and one good week and 2 good weeks and all of a sudden. But when you break it down to 1% every single day, it's doable. And you don't see it in the first 2, 3, 4 days, but all of a sudden you fast forward a week or two and you compound that 1% every day, and that's a significant difference. So I'm glad you touched on that. So we're going to change lanes here now into something that I actually don't know what you're going to say on some of these questions, and I'm excited to jump into what we call our hot seats. And as you know, because you've listened to the show, the only thing that you have to do is just say the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay, I'm going to close my eyes so I can focus.
All right, you have one last meal, and you can absolutely choose anything. What do you pick?
Pizza.
Nice. Favorite smell?
Cookies.
Favorite sport?
Football.
Favorite
College
team?
football.
College football. Favorite team?
Gators.
Favorite book?
Ooh, Bible.
Favorite all-time movie?
Oh, there's so many. I'll go with Star Wars right now.
You know, a side note to that question, Matthew Del Negro, who was just a guest on our podcast, he answered that question great because he said it depends on what mood he's in. And for those that know, my all-time favorite movie is A Few Good Men. But to his point, he was saying, like if I'm in the mood for a comedy, I'm not picking A Few Good Men. So you answered that pretty honestly. So you get an extra 1.5 points.
Yes.
Doesn't equate to anything, but it sounds
I feel
good.
like I'm on $25,000 pyramid, by the way.
Favorite singer, group, or band?
Beastie Boys.
Nice. Favorite. What's your all-time favorite Beastie Boys song?
Paul Revere was like one of the first ones that I ever memorized. So I'm not good at memorizing music. And so that was one. Me and my buddy, we sat at the basketball court at the local elementary school with our boom box and a pad of paper. And we wrote down every word and memorized that song.
No sleep till Brooklyn. All right. So I think I know this answer, but I'm curious. And I'm going to say this. I'm going to cheat myself. So you can't say your wife because I'm curious who the next person would be. Is if you were stuck in a foxhole and you could only choose one person to have your back, who would it be?
There's a couple, but there's one. It's a really good buddy. His name's Raphael, and that dude is his money. I know he would jump through a wall and he would throw himself on a grenade if it came in a foxhole without hesitation. So Raphael.
I'm going to choose Raphael too if he'll be in my foxhole as well.
He would, man. I'm telling you, this guy is a cut above the rest.
I love it. So before, when you were younger, you talked about excuses and things that you had given. I'm curious, when people face adversity and they find themselves with their back against the wall, why do you think that some people give up and some people just won't give up? What do you think the difference is, and do you think it's more of a mindset, or possibly is it the way that people are built?
That's a deep question. Do we have another 45 minutes? I think for me I can only speak for myself, so I'm not going to project on what I think of other people. I think for me it was fear. Fear is what held me back from so much, and I don't know if it was. I have a good idea that for me, the fear came from ridicule and judgment, and I had a really poor self-esteem, poor self-image, that if I did something and failed, people would make fun of me. And so I don't know where that came from. I don't know if it's part of epigenetics that came from my parents, that came from their parents, and it's just part of our lineage. But there are some people that at an early age are risk takers and they're not afraid of anything. And that's what that book Mindset talks about, is you can see it in young kids as early as kindergarten, the ones that want to be challenged and the ones that don't want a challenge. And so for me, I feel like that I wasn't allowed to not quit. I didn't say that right. Well, I was allowed to quit, actually, is probably a better way to say it. And I wasn't pushed as much. So I think that became habitual for me. But the fear was more prevalent for me. And I think that's what potentially could be the roadblock for other people, but I can't speak for other people. But for me, I would say fear.
No, I think that's true for a lot of people, and I think it goes a step further as fear of the unknown, and that's positive or negative. You know, what if I accomplish this goal, or what if I don't? You know, what if I become the best player on the team or the best actor, or what if I don't make that play? And I think it plays on both sides of it. So we talked about a couple of different quotes, and I was curious, do you have an all-time favorite quote?
You know what? I have so many. One thing I did, this is more of a really good, this is a verse that has helped reshape who I am. And it's, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. And to me, that it resonates so much, is that just that first part, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit. And that's really helped me. So
No, I think that's a very powerful statement is how you do it and where you come from. And I think at the end of that is obviously depending upon where you come from and where you start, a lot of times it almost predicts where you will be at the end. If you want to do something just for money or just for acknowledgement, I think it's different than when you say, I want to do this to help somebody else. So because we're dealing with these challenging times and something that's we've never dealt with not only in our country but the entire world with this coronavirus, I wanted to maybe put you on the spot here and ask you if you had to give our listeners one piece of advice or one suggestion on a way to stay active and stay more positive during these challenging times, what would you recommend?
I think it goes back to that quote. I think if there was one thing specific is get up every day and think, how can I add value to somebody else? We have so many opportunities, so many ways that we can reach more people, because now more people are sitting in front of their computer than ever. More people, which is crazy to say, more people are more in tune to social media. They're listening to what you have to say. And so think of how you can add value to them, how you can add value to yourself every day, which I think is critical, because you've heard you can't pour into others if your pitcher's empty. And then also, how can you pour into your family? Like how can you add value to those people around you? And I honestly know for me, that's changed everything. When I get up is, what can I do today to add value?
That's really key that you touched on that. And I think one of the things that I'm realizing now too is because there is less things going on, because we are, self-quarantining and we are going through the social distance, the reality is people are not driving as much. They're not traveling, whether it's planes, trains, buses, whether it's even something as simple as Ubers. And with all the sports being suspended in our country, to your point, and I think it's a very, very good point to bring up to our listeners, is people are looking at social media today, and it's crazy to say this, and as I'm saying it, it kind of shocks me. They're looking at social media more today than they were 2, 3, 4 weeks ago. And I look back at 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, and I think, we were all looking at social media too much. And I think people said, stay off of social media as much as we do. But the reality is when there's no TV, in the sense of no live games, when there are no movies, you can't go to a movie now. So, you can only watch Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime as much. So I think the importance is, and it goes back to something we touched on, is really focus on what you're putting in front of your eyes, your ears. And not only that, but what are you putting in your mouth? What do you say to other people? So I'm really glad that you brought that up. So for our listeners, Jeff, that want to follow you or find out more about you, what's the best way for them to do it? And for those that want to also follow the awesome stuff you do on social media, if you wouldn't mind sharing that as well.
Yeah, sure. So for me, my Instagram is where I'm the most active, or actually the only place that I'm active. And my screen name is Jeff, and then the number 4 and Esther. So it's JEFF, the number 4, ESTER. So Jeff Forrester. And then if any of your listeners want to gain some value from some things that I've put on paper, again, I just want to add value. This doesn't cost anything. They can either reach out to you, or they can go to my webpage, which is active-futures.com, and just shoot me a contact message. And I've put together 4 modules of things that I do feel like would help people from a professional, personal development. They can have for free. I put it down on paper, and this goes back to adding value. It doesn't cost anything. It didn't cost me anything to put it on paper, so I'm not going to charge anybody for it. But if anybody can find value in it, I'd be happy to send them something. There's 4 modules, and I know that it would help out.
That's awesome. So last question, I know you know this, is wanted to see if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
I just be intentional. Be intentional about having a no quit living attitude. Be intentional about adding value to yourself, your family, and your community. These are crazy, wild times that we're in that we haven't faced before. But uncertainty is something that follows us every single day, no matter if the coronavirus existed or not. So take the time to challenge yourself. Every day is new. Every day has opportunities involved. So live life to the fullest. Love people. Be positive, and do your best.
I love it. I appreciate Jeff. I know we will continue to stay in touch. And for our listeners, if you do not follow Jeff, I would highly recommend that. And if anybody wants to find out more about Jeff or get his information, you can obviously find it on Instagram, or you can reach out to me as well. So thank you, Jeff, and I definitely look forward to just talking to you again soon.
Appreciate it, Chris.
Thank you for listening to episode number 255. Jeff is quite an inspirational gentleman, and he delivered a lot on today's episode. A question I have for each of you to ask yourself is very simple. Are you being intentional with both your actions as well as your relationships? To close today's episode, I pose this challenge. Amidst these difficult and trying times, are you willing to and can you add value to others on a daily basis? Perhaps it's a phone call, a text message, or maybe stopping by a friend or loved one's home just to check on them. Whatever you do, please add value to others. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.